In 2002, the original Oakley Medusa was released. It was peak early 2000s fashion, very outside the box thinking, very avant-garde, and it quickly became iconic to the point where even today people are paying thousands of dollars to get their hands on one. Fast forward to 2025, and Oakley reached out to me asking if I was up for bringing one of their more experimental designs to life. I guess they saw some of my other projects. Anyways, as soon as I saw what they have in mind, I immediately agreed, even with a tight 2-month deadline, but you'll see why.
Future Genesis is their sci-fi universe with comics and animated films, and in one of them, we see a somewhat familiar design. This is Medusa Future Genesis, a futuristic version of the original, and I think you see why I got hooked. The original was very primal and raw, while the new one is very sleek and refined, and with all the lights and everything at the back, it kind of reminds me of some sort of VR Neuralink precision instrument or something. The fit is much tighter, so that means that there's not going to be much space for electronics. In mythology, Medusa has snakes for hair, that's where the name comes from, and we can see some of these snaky features in this futuristic design also, like this flattened forehead or the hexagonal scales. So it has to be as sleek and snaky as possible, but I still need to fit my head in it, so I need to figure out what's the smallest possible size. Now this is full-grain leather, the toughest one that I could find. The original Medusa was made out of leather, so I was thinking maybe it would work again. Natural materials are much more comfy and breathable to wear, but not at the expense of accuracy. So I did some details tests, and it was looking pretty good, but my engineering brain was kinda paranoid. I'm really worried that with all the lights and everything at the back only, even such thick leather will just stretch and not hold its shape over time. Stacking more layers or using some sort of a shell underneath would just defeat the purpose, so I just need to cut my losses. As I see it, my only shot in nailing both the sleek proportions and the details is resin printing. With no time to spare, I requested all the files they have and spent the next couple of weeks modeling. The upside of resin printing is the precision, but the downside is that it's as precise as you make it. I modeled in hundreds of these hexagons and thousands of these stitches just to make it extra real when you look up close. I'm gonna be building 2 prototypes for them, one movie accurate and one with their logo. I settled on Anycubic Stuff 2.0 resin in gray. It cures somewhat flexible, but I think it will not deform from the weight of the LEDs. Maintaining the shape is not only for looks. The goggles and the ear covers will be magnet mounted, so everything needs to align and stay aligned. Even with resin printing, there are layer lines or defects that must be taken care of, like this little groove on the side here. That means, you guessed it, hours and hours of wet sanding. My favorite. Sanding resin with 1500 grit paper is like rubbing it with a t-shirt, so you kind of need to get patient and learn to have fun with it. For sanity's sake, I did mix it up between sanding and production of other parts. To maintain this clean sci-fi look, I had to dial in the final fitment of parts by hand. It's a bit fiddly, but I think it's worth it. Even though the resin is the primary material, there's still a problem to be solved by something else. At this desired sleek thickness, the resin is still quite flexible, and attaching goggles with magnets will not work if there's just so much free play. Even a millimeter is a lot when the magnets are this small. That's why I made this retainer plate. It's from SUNLU PLA. It's very stiff, and it will ensure that the goggles snap in perfectly every time. Time was flying, so behind the scenes, after some tests, I settled on the final colorway. All the references are kind of dark, but you can tell what's metallic, what's glossy, and what's matte. Accuracy, of course, is the goal, but so is looking good. So I picked tones that are different to help separation of parts, but not too different, if that makes sense. So some parts are gunmetal, some matte black, and for example, the side hemispheres, they're this graphite metallic gray to help reflect the LED light. I sprayed the parts with top coats and let them air dry for 24 hours before assembly. You know, better safe than sorry. Gluing stuff together was really quick as the parts were just so precisely fitted. It was actually fun to move this fast. To keep everything together, I used regular super glue, some CA accelerant, and some clamps. To make the joints more manageable, I didn't do everything at once. First I tacked down the front, and then I continued gluing the seam once I knew that the first part will not pop open. This way I just avoided having large surfaces covered in glue. You know, when stuff starts sliding around but freezes the moment you want to readjust. Yeah, so that. I decided to use magnets because unlike Velcro or push buttons, magnets don't wear out, and you literally can't put together a magnet wrong way. But that's only part of the story. I knew that I wanted a wow feature in this build, and magnets are a part of it. So in the film, Medusa appears out of thin air, and looking back I should have used a different resin for that effect, but my plan now is to use LEDs for a similar effect. I'm connecting the magnets to the controller, so when the goggle magnets close the circuit, it will trigger this startup waterfall animation. This will add a tiny bit of showmanship to putting on the goggles, and I'm thinking since it's Oakley, the eyewear part kinda needs to be emphasized. I went with 8 pairs of magnets because that seemed like the right amount to keep the frames firmly in place, and 8 should be enough to keep the circuit closed so the lights would just not start flashing randomly. Snaps and plays beautifully. Finally, the whole reason why I wanted to build this thing. The lights. I'll be using the densest and the narrowest addressable LEDs that I could find. Since the tubes are just so small, to get that full 360 wraparound glow with no shadows, I need to put 2 strips back to back. So the power consumption of course is doubled, but so is the brightness. I offset the strips a little bit so the hotspots form this snake scale pattern when looking from the side. There are 15 of these light strands, so 30 strips with 3 solder points each. Those are then grouped together and extended, and then those groups are grouped together. So in total there are under 200 solder joints just for the lights alone, which is funny because that's the exact number that I have patience for. It's not complicated work, but it was really exhausting to make every joint perfectly. These addressable LEDs are just so temperamental, you risk wiping out the entire group in parallel if you short circuit just the one, and that's why I kept testing them at every step. Oh yeah, and I added some clear zip ties into the top strands so they would just flow a bit nicer. It's not stupid if it works. The next bit was kind of like building a ship in a bottle or open heart surgery. There's no space for any extra wires, so everything had to be assembled, trimmed, and soldered in place. But my hands and tools barely fit. It was kind of like the LEDs. Important work, but boring. There's no space for an onboard battery, so I will be using a power bank. Problem is, these blank USB-C ports do not work with power banks, so I need to solder on 2 tiny resistors to trick the power bank into outputting 5 volts. Stupid like a fox. I coat it in resin and cook it for a bit. The benefit of being the one who made all the blueprints is that you can just use them. So I flattened the inner surfaces in Rhino and cut them out of fabric with a laser. This gave me the perfectly fitted lining. Oakley sent me over a pack of their lens blanks that they call black iridium, and I think it's the same color that they used in the original Medusa, but I'm not sure. In any case, these are way oversized, so I need to figure out how to trim these to shape without a massive sunglasses factory. Just because it's some fancy, expensive optical material doesn't mean that I need to go high-tech. Like I said, it's not stupid if it works, so let's see if this does work, or you'll not see it and we'll pretend it never happened. My thinking is I can't just cut them to size, because how? With my mom's scissors or something? So my approach is to get within a millimeter or so by grinding and dial in the final diameter by hand, just like with the resin parts. Nah, not too bad. And just ignore my friend at the back there. Then I spent a couple of days programming to get the effect just right. Putting on the goggles triggers this activation animation and the lights just wash over once, and after it, this pulsing animation starts. And when you take them off, the animations don't get cut abruptly, they just gently fizzle out. There's over 1600 LEDs, so at maximum brightness they would be pulling around 110 watts of power, which is outrageously unsafe to wear. That's like 11 light bulbs worth of power. So I'm software limiting the peak brightness to 10%. It's still very visible in daylight and it will not melt the battery in like 10 seconds. After 8 weeks and all this work, how about we take it out for a spin? Medusa Future Genesis, in the flesh. Well, at least my interpretation of it. Walking around in the night streets wearing it was a pretty amazing feeling. You could definitely tell that all eyes were on me. It's fair and expected, really. I'm not completely clueless, but you know, for such a fashion statement piece, it kind of felt like this was the right context, just making ordinary life extraordinary. Overall, the Medusa OG is really comfortable to wear. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I was worried a bit that the LED tubes would snag on clothing, but I didn't have a single issue all night, so that was also pretty cool. When it got really dark, the camera just didn't know what to do with the lights. But yeah, wearing stuff like this just gives me so much motivation to craft and exhibit stuff more, and I hope it kind of hypes you up too.
So what else didn't I show you yet? The Medusa FG is powered by a standard USB-C port, so you know, for exhibition or something you can just plug in a laptop charger and it's gonna go forever. But for wearing, I'm using a power bank and one of these magnetic disconnecting wires. So in case the cable gets caught on something, you will not rip out all of the electronics, it will just gently disconnect. I really love these for wearables. Of course it was accuracy and overall quality the focus of this build, but I just couldn't help myself and add a little twist. Yeah, it has an app. It's this very simple UI that lets you select the brightest and the darkest color in the gradient over Bluetooth. You can get some pretty cool effects.
When it comes to programming, you really are just limited by your skills and creativity. You can add other animations, make it react to sound, change color based on how fast you're moving and other crazy things. I just really like the original animation, so I just made it alter the colors, and yeah, that's a good start.
You can of course wear the Medusa FG without the goggles, like the original, but then I felt that the glasses part is kind of wasted, so I created these.
It's just a pair of legs that attach to the same magnets, so you can wear these standalone. It's my own design, but inspired by the Medusa FG. They have the same color and the same hexagonal accents, as you see. They're quite unusual for everyday wear, but much less so than full-on cyberpunk LED headgear. It's kind of a diet Medusa experience wearing these. I made some custom enclosures and put together a little handbook and said my goodbyes. Who knows, maybe one day we'll see these in some red carpet event somewhere. Overall, the project was really fun and high tempo, and it was really cool to do something fashion related. I think that's a really interesting field, and I hope I get some more projects like this.
Anyways, let me know in the comments what you thought about it, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.